You are listening to Fruitless, a podcast about history, politics, faith, media, and the internet, hosted by me, Josiah Sutton. This is episode 33, Drawing Dinosaurs, featuring Paleoartist Tyler Stone. Welcome everybody to Fruitless. I am joined today by Tyler Stone. Hello.
Hello there. Thank you for having me.
We've kind of like known each other for a while now, but for
a long time, yeah.
Most of the people who probably listening to this don't know you. So why don't you give a quick introduction? Who are you?
Hi. So I'm Tyler Stone, as we have established. I by day, or I guess really I should say by night, I am a full-time editor and photojournalist at a local news station here in town.
Des Moines, Iowa.
Yes, here in Des Moines, Iowa. And for tongue-in-cheek legal reasons, all opinions are my own and do not necessarily reflect those of my employer, although I don't think this will attract. So that is my day/night job, because I'm on the night side of that. But then on the side, I am a freelance artist specializing in Paleoart,
which is what I asked you to come on to talk about, because that is a subject I think I know pretty much nothing about.
Oh, that's what I'm here for.
Yeah, that's what I'm interested in. Yeah, so this is fun also thing to point out too is I do like that I have kind of a collection of guests in my podcast that are just people I worked with at a coffee shop several years back, because Chris Barker is like a reoccurring guest on this.
Oh man, I haven't talked to him in years. We'd have to have a crossover event sometime. That would be great.
The artwork for the shows by Kip Paulson, I'm just collecting all these former coworkers.
Smoky Row all the way down.
Smoky Row in Des Moines it's got its fingers in all sorts of shit.
Smoky Row veterans and refugees podcast to talk about your particular niche.
That's right. So I don't know. In general, I've been having kind of a tangentially an interest more and more in paleo stuff. I think what I'm interested right now, I've been getting more interested in right now is in general ecology and how that relates to politics or whatever. But because of that, I've just been having too many YouTube rabbit trails where I'm watching stuff about biogeography, which is of course related. And then that of course connects to, interesting shit about this. So I thought, why don't I talk to you about this? Someone who knows this, but also somebody who, Paleoart is something that really fascinates me because, art and science are often treated as diametrically opposed or something. Yeah. And it's a field that's just adamantly in the middle of those things.
They are inextricably linked to each other. Yeah. So Paleoart is a branch of scientific illustration that aims to depict prehistoric life, extinct organisms, mostly animals and plants, but I mean anything that's alive and very, very dead falls under that umbrella. Aims to depict them based on scientific evidence, and really sets out to try to give the most accurate depiction possible based on all the current evidence that we have and our current understanding of whatever subject matter you're trying to depict.
That's super cool. So I think maybe on a personal note, one thing I'm interested in is how did you end up kind of in this field, to begin with?
It's an interesting thing, because I mean, some of it is just I've always loved animals, and prehistoric ones have very much been at the top of the list. I've loved dinosaurs for as long as I can remember, and I've been drawing for as long as I can remember. So basically what that means is for as long as I can remember, I've been drawing dinosaurs. And of course, as a kid, that was just, either drawing one like I'd seen it on TV or in a movie, or being like, oh, I think it might look like this. And then, as I got older, kind of around high school, I started to really learn more about like Paleoart as like this is an actual discipline, an actual, like I said, a branch of scientific illustration, and started getting more into the science of it. And okay, how do you actually go about even figuring out what these things that lived, tens or even hundreds of millions of years before any people, how do you even figure out what they were like when they were alive? And to some extent, that also kind of went hand in hand with me also getting into like creature design and sort of like, how do people design creatures and monsters for movies and entertainment? There's kind of some overlap there.
Yeah, because I know I recently watched 1 Million Years B.C. That we chatted about that on Twitter recently, but I know that movie, a lot of his the design that Ray Harryhausen used in that came from like old Paleoart, from like way outdated by the time he was even using it, but like he was pulling from like Charles Knight and shit.
Yeah, which actually that could be something we discuss here, because Charles Knight was, for his time was
really good.
Yeah, it was really good and really on the money. Well, there's something to be said, for creature design that like, I love accurate dinosaurs and things, but I can live with movie monster things if they look good.
Yeah, if they're fun.
Personality, like if it's done well, I'm not here to be the fun police. I'm here to have a good time too.
Yeah, I think it was Harryhausen about that movie who said, "I'm not making this movie for professors."
Yes, exactly. Yes. This has women in fur bikinis fighting stop motion dinosaurs. There's no value here, and that's fine. There's not supposed to be.
Yeah, there's a giant iguana, like.
Yes, exactly. So that's kind of how I got just into the subject. As far as actually getting lucky enough to, at least on occasion, get paid to do it. So I went to University of Iowa. I double majored in art and in cinema.
Oh, nice.
Just insists on being, we're real serious about it. And my last semester of college, I graduated with honors in art. And so to do that, I had to do an honors art project for the semester, kind of separate from all my classes. And because I'm a nerd, and I'd taken some 2D animation classes and really enjoyed it, I did an animation on whale evolution, because that is
cool.
one of the like poster children now for evidence of evolution, and just one of the coolest things. I got to spend my last semester of college drawing and animating whales with legs.
That's so fun.
Just a delightful sentence. But then at the same time, I did also take just for fun, because again, I'm a nerd. You probably never would guess from what we're talking about. I took a couple of classes on paleontology while I was at Iowa. My very first semester, I took Age of Dinosaurs with Dr. Chris Brochu. And then my last semester, I took the other class he teaches, which is Evolution of the Vertebrates. And I got to have a pretty good relationship with him from that class. And so I showed him my honors project when it was done, just because I knew he would be someone who would
appreciate it. Yeah.
The research and kind of all the stuff that has to go behind the scenes to something like that. And he was really impressed with it. And a couple months after I graduated, he emailed me, he reached out to me and said, "Hey, one of my former graduate students and I are co-authoring a paper on this animal called Dinosuchus. And the journal that it's being published in wants to feature, our paper is the one that's going to be featured on the cover. Would you be interested in doing the illustration?"
Oh, hell yeah.
So that was my first commission out of college, was an illustration for the cover of the Journal of Vertebrate Paleontology, like an actual major peer-reviewed scientific journal.
That's really cool. When was that? I don't remember when you graduated.
That was 2020. Yeah, because I graduated in 2019, and then nothing bad happened. Everything was normal. The world definitely didn't come to an end for a few years.
Well, there you had a lot of time to sit indoors and draw dinosaurs. So yes. There you go.
Yes, it was. It was. Oh, cool. Now what? Yes, that was my first commission, and I've done a couple other things for publication since then. I've done. I did the press artwork for another JVP paper. I did some illustrations that not Paleoart, but some illustrations for an article about cryptozoology in the
nice.
magazine, and basically about how the quote unquote science of unknown animals kind of failed to be a science and just went off the rails. That's probably for another podcast episode.
That would be an interesting subject to revisit, though, for sure. Because
so I part of me, maybe just the part of me that like doesn't want to speak too highly of myself. Like I don't know if I necessarily even want to go so far as to like call Paleoart a side gig. I mean, I do have a full-time job that pays my bills, but I'm very, very happy to say that it's, it is, if nothing else, a hobby that I am like deep in the trenches with. I'm fortunate enough to get paid to do on occasion. So, I cannot complain.
Absolutely. So I guess I'm kind of interested. Yeah. So is it something that like major journals reach out, like a journal, like someone who's writing a paper reaches out to you generally? Is like that how it works, or like?
Pretty much. Yeah. It's, I mean, my very first commission, that's very like ultimate case of, it's not only what you know, it's who you know. I've had, obviously that was because my old professor was the co-author on that paper. And I know he's got, so he's like a leading expert in fossil crocodilians and their kin. Okay. And I know that there are some African croc fossils that we've talked about having me do some artwork for whenever the time comes. I'm not sure where things are with that because, scientific studies and then the process of getting them peer reviewed and published take time. And also considering the fact that, as far as I'm aware, all of those fossils are kept in Africa.
Right.
There was this pesky little pandemic kind of throwing off travel. I'm sure that I have no idea how big a wrench that threw in the works, but I'm sure it threw one in.
Of course, yeah.
But yeah, it's generally my experience has been that, if it's on the academic side of things, or, anything for publication in a journal or a magazine, it's usually an author on whatever's you're doing the illustration for is the one who will reach out to me initially, asking about it and kind of hashing out the initial details. And then from there, once we're like, okay, we're diving in, we're doing this. I've, by that point, drafted up and had them sign a basic contract because, helpful tip if you want to make some kind of living off of art. Get things in writing. It's just good practice. Usually then at that point is when they'll get me in touch with the publisher, with someone actually in charge of this, and they'll give me the details. I'm like, okay, this is how we'll get you paid. This is what we'll work out. This is what, rights are gonna look like for it with licensing, with giving us as publishers usage rights, what format we need, what resolution, all the kind of the nitty gritty, the stuff that isn't exciting, but is just kind of comes with the territory of like, yes, there is the actual like,
business side,
logistical. Yes. The business side of art. Yeah. Crazy how when you do something for money, you do actually have to like, to do that properly.
Yeah, absolutely. So like what is, I guess, because like what goes into the actual process of drawing it? Because I'm sure it isn't just you read the essay, you kind of shrug and then just doodle something based off.
Oh yeah, it's very, very research oriented. Obviously, if you're illustrating for a specific study, a specific paper, that's going to be your starting point, and that's where it's really good to collaborate with your author, whoever your point of contact is on that. Of like, obviously you will read the paper yourself, but trying to get an idea from them of like, what is the big idea of the paper? What are you wanting to depict? What are you wanting to kind of get across in the, because Paleoart, like any kind of scientific illustration, really any illustration work, especially for research or anything educational, it's not just about we are depicting this species, but you want to try to find a way to visually get across the theme and the point of like, what is the thrust of this study or this article? What are we trying to say? So my Dinosaurs illustration, which for the folks at home, a Dinosaurs is an alligatoid. So it's not an alligator proper, but it is like at the base of that branch of the family tree that lived in the late Cretaceous, 75 million years ago. It was the size of a bus. It ate dinosaurs. We actually have some dinosaur bones with big holes in them that are the exact size and shape of this animal's teeth.
Oh my god.
Yeah, really cool animal. And what that paper was, it was basically like the culmination of what had been the lead author's graduate thesis. It was a systematic review of the animals. So looking at all the fossil material that was available, that he could get his hands on, everything available, including some new specimens, and trying to give a really the most complete overview possible of the animal. Because this is an animal that has been known since, I believe it was first named back in like, I want to say the 1940s, but it might even be earlier. Like it was in pretty much all my dinosaur books growing up. And it's known from parts of the entire body. Emphasis on parts. It's lots of fragments. I think the paper I did the illustration for was actually the first one to describe a like relatively complete and well preserved skull.
Okay.
So the illustration I did was in 3 parts, where I drew the whole skeleton of the animal, and then all the muscles, and then the last part was a life reconstruction, trying to actually depict what it might have looked like when it was alive. And the whole idea behind doing a really detailed, rigorous anatomical illustration like that was, to get across the point that the whole goal of this paper is to try to give the most complete picture, complete overview of this animal that we have had. So the whole purpose of doing an illustration like that was to get across that idea visually, that this is our first time having a really good picture of the animal in its entirety. So there's that aspect. You want to make sure that you are representing the main crux of whatever it is you're illustrating. As far as the actual process of doing the illustration goes, then that's where, God, you pull in things from so many different places. So, I was looking at all the figures in the paper, all the photos that they had of the fossil material of the skull. He sent me a really good cast reconstruction of the skull from a museum in Texas.
Cool.
Ideally, if I could have afforded it, I would have loved to be able to like travel to see some of these in person, because any artist will tell you, no matter what it is you're drawing, whether it's what I do or like a figure drawing or a still life or something, the best thing is to always have model or the props or whatever it is like in front of you, so you can just see it in 3 dimensions. But sometimes that's not always doable. You do the best with what you have, but you got to start with the fossils. You got to look at the material that's actually there. And then from there, it's, I was looking up older papers on the animal, everything I could find that was like, scientific, that was peer reviewed, that was credible, to try to help just build my knowledge of it and really inform that. And then also the thing that's really important with paleoart is doing comparative anatomy, is looking at living animals and looking at the way that they're put together to understand how extinct animals are put together, because they're built the same way. It's the same basic foundation. Because that's actually, I guess I could have also mentioned earlier, I do also have a TikTok with, I think I'm like just shy of 24,000 followers now.
Oh Jesus!
I talk about paleontology a lot, and I get a lot of questions from people like, well, how do you know that? How do you know it looks like? Are they just making it up? Or are they just guessing? And it's no. You look at modern animals and their anatomy and how they're built, and how to kind of read the signs in the bones of where muscles attached, and certain bone textures can correlate with certain kinds of soft tissue. All these things, and you look at all those so that then you can look at the fossils and go, okay, I know how to interpret this in something alive. Which means then if I see those same features in something that's extinct, I can reasonably infer, okay, that's what's there. So, my main point of reference was the American alligator, closest living relative, which I had some interesting Google searches at that point. I was looking up like alligator dissections, like that. Yeah, which, it sounds a little gross, but I mean, that's the best way to understand them. So I was using, alligator bones to kind of help fill in the gaps for, parts of the fossil parts of the animal that we don't have. We don't have every single vertebra, but you're not going to randomly have one vertebra in the middle of 2 others that's a completely different shape. So you can reasonably guess what it looks like, especially if you have a close relative to look at. And that's also where having good communication with whoever you're doing the illustration for is really important. Whether it's like a private client who's just, I'm also a dinosaur nerd and I would like you to draw this dinosaur for me. Okay, is this design to your liking? Is this kind of what you're wanting? Or with scientific research being like, hey, is this accurate? Am I on the right track? Is this thing that's maybe a bit more speculative on my part a reasonable thing to think that maybe this animal could have had? Who knows? At some point down the road, new evidence could end up showing that, like, oh, I was not on the mark with that. But
Right.
That's really the important thing to understand with paleoart is, in its own way, it is a hypothesis, and it's why I said earlier, based on all the evidence that we currently have, and on the understanding that we currently have,
Which is very liable for change.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, it's the nature of the subject of paleontology. It's
the nature of a lot of things.
Yes.
Yeah.
One of the first things that Dr. Brochu told us in his classes was one of the important concepts is fossil record is incomplete and biased.
Mhm.
We don't have fossils of everything that's ever lived, and we probably never will. We don't have complete specimens for a lot of them, and we don't have good records of every kind of animal in every kind of environment.
Yeah.
All things like parts of the world that are very prone to erosion, mountains,
Right.
island areas, those don't preserve fossils very well. We don't have a lot of fossils from the really deep sea.
Right. The Antarctic, I know, is a big part of that too, right?
Well, so right now I'm actually doing an illustration of a dinosaur from Antarctica.
Oh,
So
sick.
we do have those. The problem is that the vast majority of Antarctica is, covered in ice, extremely thick ice.
Well, don't worry, we're fixing that.
Yeah. Whoops. We accidentally set Earth to thaw. And the parts of the continent where there is exposed fossil-bearing rock, it's only a small part of it, and even then, it's Antarctica, so it's not exactly a walk in the park to
go get that.
do excavations there. Yes, it's difficult. But there's also things like the kinds of animals are kind of my main bread and butter. The kinds of animals that get preserved, that's also biased. The fossil record is, with some exceptions at different sites, very biased toward preserving large animals, because large animals with large bones are more likely to survive the process of fossilization. There's more of them, so it's going to take longer for scavengers to pick them over before they can get buried. So it's the nature of the science, is that we are working with incomplete information, and we do the best that we can based on everything that we have. And then if you are working on something that's kind of fragmentary, you do your best to make the most plausible reconstruction that you can at that point, and then you hope that you find more of that in the future. And best case scenario for you as an artist, you end up being right on the money. Your speculation and your inferences were informed enough that you you predicted it, you got it right. That is a thing that does happen in paleoart. Or you find more remains and it turns out, oh wow, this animal has very unique, novel anatomy that we didn't expect, and that's really cool and exciting in its own right, because then that's a really fun surprise that oh wow, this thing was even more exciting and unusual than we imagined. And in general, to me, that's the joy of paleontology and doing paleoart, is that in a weird way you kind of feel like you're discovering these things for yourself too, because it's not as much as I love monsters and a good creature design and a good fantasy creature. It's different when it's oh, this thing looks like it could be out of some fantastical, movie or video game or TV show or something. But this thing actually lived on our same planet Earth. This was a real thing that used to walk the planet. That's so cool.
That is so cool. There's some really interesting parallels between academic history and paleoart that I was kind of thinking about throughout what you just talked about, that I think is kind of interesting, because history is one of the things I have some academic training in, right? It's an undergrad level, but at least that's a field I vaguely know. it's a field I'm vaguely familiar with. And a big part of it that, like, you know, every professor I had, most historians I know talk about is that, the record that we have of things, you know, that humans have done, have written down or whatever is always incomplete and biased.
Yes.
And
it's
so
by the winners.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Example.
Yeah. And actually, this is just kind of a funny parallel. I remember my girlfriend Kelly and I, when we were both history undergrads, we actually would use Jurassic Park as a way of like a metaphor for talking about how history works, because there's that whole chunk in the kind of fictional science that's in the beginning, right, where they're like, we have most of the DNA, but we have to fill in gaps with things. So they, like, in the movie, supposedly pull from like toads. Yeah, exactly. And that's what we were saying, is like that's what doing history often is, you know, you're just left with this incomplete stuff, and you have to be making these inferences about everything that fills in the gaps. And I think I don't know, I'm interested by that parallel, because it's kind of like what paleoart is doing with scientific data and then producing a visual thing, as history is like taking like written data, written stuff, and in some archaeology, and then trying to make a literary work out of it.
Yes.
Which is something people don't often think about, but history is a creative act, you know, and the same thing kind of here.
Yes, exactly. It's, you are, the analogy that I have used for many different aspects of it, but that I think applies to both what I do and what you do with history stuff. It's like a jigsaw puzzle that you don't have all the pieces for. And so you fill in the jigsaw puzzle as best you can, and then you have to try to figure out what those missing pieces look like. And hopefully, at some point, if you get lucky, maybe you'll find another copy of that jigsaw puzzle that's also incomplete. Mm-hmm. But, you know, aside from whatever overlapping pieces they do have, maybe that has at least
an
a few
extra one
you're missing from the original one.
Yeah.
You can fill in that picture a little more. And I think that's kind of an important thing to understand with science in general, is it's not, obviously the history of any science is filled with like mistakes and things that, you know, we got wrong. But that doesn't mean that like everything we know now is also going to end up being just wrong in the future. It's not a binary thing. Again, it's a jigsaw puzzle. You're starting from a position of ignorance, from a place where you only have a few pieces, and you're trying to make inferences from not a lot of information. And over time, you're getting more pieces and filling in those blanks. And, you know, sometimes your guesses were completely wrong, and so you throw them out. But as time goes on, it starts going from, okay, we need to really rethink these broad strokes, to, okay, we've got the broad strokes down, and now we're refining the details.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that you bring up history with all this, because, I mean, paleoart has been like kind of hand in hand with paleontology pretty much since the start, since paleontology like originated as a formalized science, because, you know, paleoart is kind of the only way that we have to actually see these things and these ancient worlds. You know, we don't have time machines. I have yet to have a friendly British alien land in my yard in a blue box.
Right.
All I have right now is my cat trying to get into who knows what. I should probably kick him out at some. You know, we can't go and see these things for ourselves. So, you know, paleoart has been really important for the history of paleontology as a way to communicate and actually visualize what we're learning from the fossil record. And so what's interesting is when you look at the history of paleoart, you basically just see laid out visually the history of paleontology and the history of our understanding of the past.
And I think something like when you get into, I mean, any academic subject, a thing that often hits me is just how young so many fields really are, you know, is like, you know, again, no understanding of paleoart, but just looking briefly at like just the Wikipedia thing, I didn't even realize that like a good chunk of what we understand about dinosaurs really started coming mostly in the 70s.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. I thought it was older than that.
The dinosaur renaissance. Yeah, we can get into that. Well, that's very true of paleontology itself, because paleontology, even compared to other sciences, as a formal science, it is very, very young. It's, you know, we actually just hit back in February the 200th anniversary of of the naming of Megalosaurus, the first dinosaur to be named by modern science.
Mhm.
Not a long time in the scheme of things. Paleontology is a very young science because if you think about it, there were a lot of other sciences that kind of had to come into their own, kind of had to get through their infancy for it to be a thing. Because
I'm automatically popping into my head as chemistry, right? You need to do carbon dating, right?
Yeah, well, in some ways, that's kind of a more recent.
That's even
I guess.
recent.
That's very involved, but like at its core, paleontology, like in the most oversimplified way, is basically a mixture of biology and geoscience.
Yeah.
And so think about all the things that had to be established first. You had to have you had to have just the basic origins of taxonomy, of actually classifying and studying and understanding living organisms. Biology had to come into its own. You had to, even though it was still a long time after paleontology began before we really nailed down accurately the age of the Earth, we had to still get a basic understanding of geology and geologic processes, and the fact that there are different periods in Earth history that you see laid down as layers of strata and rock. All these things had to come into their own, and we had to get a basic understanding of them before we could even make sense of fossils. And it's actually one of the really interesting things when you look at the early history of paleontology and the early thoughts that these early scientists had about fossils. Is it's interesting to see the sort of dichotomy between at the time a lot of scientists were at least in Europe they were also they had a religious background. They were generally kind of upper crust members of like clergy, and so you see this sort of interesting struggle to reconcile these fossils that they're finding and trying to figure out what they mean with a biblical understanding of the history of the world. And when the first dinosaur was named, that was still almost 40 years 40 years before The Origin of the Species was published, before the whole idea of evolution by natural selection. The idea that
what do you do with that when you find that and you don't have
well, that's the thing. The idea of extinction was still fairly new at the time.
Oh my God.
Years old, because and it's an interesting thing. You look at the kind of the early discovery of fossils, and I think if I remember right, Thomas Jefferson had Lewis and Clark keeping their eyes peeled for mammoths, for living mammoths.
Oh my God.
On their expedition in the New World, because before the idea of extinction was a thing, it was assumed that, well, if you found bones of something,
it must be around somewhere.
Must be out there somewhere. You kind of the precursor was people kind of came to and understood the idea of local extinction.
Sure.
Because like Europe in the last ice age, it had there were cave lions, there were hyenas, there were fauna that is native to Africa and the Middle East, lived in Europe. Obviously, it doesn't live there now, and so people found bones of these animals and kind of understood that okay, maybe they used to live here, and they just don't now.
Yeah,
but they were still around elsewhere, and so the obvious assumption then was well, maybe the mammoths just don't live here anymore, but they could be somewhere. It feels so quaint now, especially when we constantly hear about how we're causing Earth's sixth mass extinction. But the idea of that something could be extinct, that there could be organisms that used to live on Earth that don't anymore, that all died out. That was a revolutionary idea when it came about. And so it's one of the interesting things, because especially as paleoart's concerned, you see some of these early discoveries come up for wow, look how badly they got it wrong. You've ever seen the Crystal Palace Park dinosaurs?
Oh yeah.
That is in England, of some of the first dinosaurs discovered, that they're these basically giant quadrupedal, they're basically giant lizards. And the most famous one is the iguanodon, which has a horn on the end of its snout. And they found more complete specimens, and it turns out, oh no, that's its thumb. Because iguanodon's thumb is modified into this big spike, but they thought it was a horn. People point to those as oh God, they're so silly. Look how much they got it wrong. And actually, I would push back against that, where I would say, yes, obviously they are very, very outdated, but for the time, for the material that they had, because they only had a few fragmentary specimens, and for the understanding of the world and the history of the world that they had at the time, they actually did a really, really damn good job.
Yeah.
Like one of the things that I'm still really impressed by, that shows just how knowledgeable these Victorian scientists actually were and how well they understood anatomy, is that the dinosaurs in Crystal Palace Park, as dated and awkward and off the mark as they are, they all stand upright with their legs directly under their bodies. And that's one of the defining features of dinosaurs as a group, is that their legs are positioned directly under their bodies. They don't sprawl out to the side like modern lizards, a lot of modern reptiles do.
Yeah.
They had enough fossils to be able to see, hey, their legs are positioned differently. And they got that detail right. The things that they got wrong are the gaps that they were trying to fill in. And at that time, those were really, really, really big gaps. But they were doing exactly what we do today, because they could tell these are big, ancient reptiles. So, of course, you would compare them to modern reptiles.
Yeah.
And then as they found more complete fossils, that's when it became clear, these actually were shaped very differently from what we initially thought. And that's not a bad thing. To me, that's like a testament that's like the ultimate example of what good science does. Like there's, the thing I love about science, and by extension, scientific illustration, there's kind of a humility to it, of, admitting that you got something wrong, and correcting the mistake. And so, in some ways, like, I guess maybe we could use this to jump into what even makes a piece of paleoart accurate. In some ways, it's like, yes, objectively, those early dinosaur reconstructions are inaccurate because we now know that isn't what they looked like. But I don't really like using the word inaccurate for them. I just like to say they're outdated. For the time and for the information that they had, those were accurate. That was an accurate reconstruction based on what they knew at the time. And then we got more fossils, and we updated our image accordingly.
Yeah.
And in some ways, I'd argue that that even though those were scientific illustrations and Jurassic World is meant to be entertainment, in some ways I would argue that like the Crystal Palace dinosaurs, even though again objectively they are more off the mark, than like the dinosaurs in Jurassic World, in some ways I would kind of be a little contrarian and say the Crystal Palace dinosaurs are more accurate than a lot of the dinosaurs in Jurassic World, because the Crystal Palace dinosaurs were attempting to be an accurate representation of those animals. They are an accurate representation of our understanding of them at that time. The Jurassic World dinosaurs are not an accurate representation of our current understanding. Or if you want maybe a better direct comparison would be the raptors in Jurassic Park and Jurassic World are essentially the exact same design. I think if I remember right, they actually, the basis for the CG models of the raptors in Jurassic World was a maquette of the raptors from the original movie.
Okay, yeah.
So
there's several decades between those movies of new data.
They're basically the exact same design, but even though they're exactly the same, I will say the raptors in Jurassic Park, even though they are the same, they are way more accurate than the ones in Jurassic World, because for the time, for the early 90s, that was a fantastic reconstruction of Deinonychus. That's a fun factoid. The raptors in Jurassic Park aren't actually Velociraptor. They're based on an animal called Deinonychus. It's a long story. But that is a really, really good representation of the animal as we understood it at that time. The raptors in Jurassic World, even though they are exactly the same, basically, as the ones in Jurassic Park, they are not an accurate representation of that animal as we understand it now. And so, like I said, I don't, if there was a good attempt to represent the animals from the information that was available at the time, I don't like to call old paleoart inaccurate, just outdated.
Outdated.
It's a time capsule of our understanding from that time.
Yeah. Well, so talking about the sense in which paleoart is often like filling in gaps using as educated of guesses as possible and stuff. I think yet again kind of connects to history here and stuff like this, but also to a subject I know we kind of wanted to we were going to maybe briefly touch on is like the kind of in general conspiratorial stuff you run into on online or whatever. I mean, part of that. Because within the field that I'm more familiar with, history, like I often see what takes place with a lot of history-based conspiracy theories is that a lot of people don't realize just how little data there is for most things. You know what I mean? So they decide this subject I'm going to deep dive on, and they suddenly realize there's like, oh, there's less data behind this than I thought. A lot of this is people filling in the gaps. And so they, you know, instead of looking at other subjects and starting to realize, well, that's just in general true of history, is we're all, you know, constantly trying to work and pull inferences from scant data. Like there's like Roman emperors that we only know exist because of a single coin. You know what I mean? Like the shit, you know,
because there's some piece of writing that has their name on it. And it's like, oh, guess that person was a thing. Yeah.
But I think because of that, there's a really bad job of educating people oftentimes especially in the US on what like a educated inference based off data looks like. And so they don't realize like there isn't, you know, everything is kind of built around us trying to interpret, you know, strange data. You know?
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of the problem comes down to, you know, especially for my side of things, a lot of people really don't understand what science is, how it actually works. That science it's not a belief system, it's a process.
Mm-hmm.
It's a methodology by which we use data to understand the world. And so, you know, they don't know how science works and how people actually go about trying to fill in the gaps.
Mm-hmm.
And the biggest thing that I've come across, especially like in my TikTok comments with when I talk about paleontology or paleoart and my art,
mm-hmm.
is people think it's just guessing.
Mm-hmm.
They think that paleontologists, you know, they dig the bones out of the ground and they put them together and then they just kind of eyeball it and go, maybe it had this thing, maybe it was this color, maybe it was and then from there, essentially the inference that they make is that, well, if they're just guessing, then any idea is as good as theirs, right?
Mm-hmm.
And no, not all ideas have equal weight. There's I don't know if being interested in history, if you saw, I think it was like just last week, and I've only heard about it because of people I know who are interested in history, because for my own sanity, I do not watch or listen to Joe Rogan.
Okay. Joe
Rogan had basically
this argument about Atlantis, right? Is that what this is?
Clint Dibble, amazing name, an actual archaeologist,
mm-hmm.
and Graham Hancock is a crackpot.
I didn't realize it was Graham Hancock in that. I've heard whispers about this you're talking about. I didn't realize it was Graham Hancock.
And I need to finally sit down and watch it, but I've seen a specific moment from it that just had me absolutely floored, because Graham Hancock, he's written multiple books about, you know, Atlantis, about his supposed lost advanced Ice Age civilization or whatever. He has an 8-part Netflix series about it, like 8 hours of content, supposedly giving all his evidence for it. And during this debate, he ended up like conceding that all the like coastal archaeological sites that they've looked at don't have any evidence for Atlantis, for his idea.
Yeah,
which is huge already. That's like what you're saying is like all of this content you put out about it before was just nonsense. I mean, we already knew that, but
right.
But he immediately pivoted to, well, we've only studied sites from a fraction of coastlines, so we can't prove that there is an evidence for it out there at other sites. Which is basically, I think it was a YouTube comment somewhere saying basically what he's saying is, you can't prove Narnia isn't real because you haven't looked in every single wardrobe. It's probably just in the wardrobe that you haven't checked in yet. Like, just because there's a gap doesn't mean that anything could be in there.
Well, and if there is something there, we don't know what it is. Exactly. You're going to like ruin the data if you come into it assuming, well, it's fucking Atlantis. It must be.
Yeah. Well, it's you know, contrary to popular belief, at a certain point, absence of evidence is evidence of absence. But again, that goes back to the point I'm kind of getting at in a roundabout way, which is that, you know, not every idea has merit, And where we make these inferences and try to fill in the gaps in our knowledge, we are doing it from an informed standpoint. So like I talked about earlier with people, being like, oh, you're just making it up. How do you know you had that? This dinosaur or this prehistoric animal had that feature. Well, it's because we study modern animal anatomy. We do comparative anatomy. We actually learn what things you can see in the bones that give you clues about how an animal's put together. So, interesting example of that. The illustration I'm using as my background to hide how messy my room is. This Stegosaurus illustration I did last year. The plates of Stegosaurus, the bottom quarter to third of the plate is really rough and lumpy and pockmarked. This really gnarled texture. And generally, when you see that in bone, what that is a sign of is that is a point where soft tissue of some kind is anchoring to that bone. However, from a functional standpoint, again, studying comparative anatomy, Stegosaurus's plates are weird because there's 2 rows of them and they're asymmetrical. So you have one plate, and then instead of having another plate right next to it, it's slightly offset backward from each other. And with the way they overlap different muscle groups where if they were anchoring directly to the muscles, they would kind of impede their function. And so what I realized as I was doing this illustration, I'll move my head so you can kind of see the part where it overlaps. As I was going on, I realized, okay, they're not anchoring to the muscles, but they have this huge area for soft tissue, and they need something to anchor them in place. And the realization kind of hit me, oh my God, at least on its back, Stegosaurus must have just had upsettingly thick skin. just like this thing was I would hate to be a prehistoric veterinarian giving Stegosaurus back surgery because it would take an hour to carefully slice through the skin to even get to what you're trying to operate on. Again, it's you take that knowledge that you have though, and you transfer it onto things, and that's maybe to get back to the jigsaw puzzle analogy. Like I said, the fossil record is incomplete and biased. A lot of prehistoric animals are not known from complete specimens, so there's sort of kind of a process of filling the gaps in with things of kind of increasing distance from what you have. So if you have an incomplete specimen, ideally you find another specimen of the same species, and you can tell they're the same species because they both preserve some of the same bones. So that overlap lets you know, yes, this is the same. Same as if you have the 2 incomplete jigsaw puzzles, but they both have some of the same pieces as each other, you can tell, okay, yeah, same puzzle. You can scale those specimens to each other and use those to basically get a composite skeleton to be obviously there's variation in growth, just variation among individuals. There's variation in sex. There's all these things that, no 2 are going to be exactly the same, but you can put them together and be like, okay, this is what a generalized specimen of this animal would look.
Yeah.
If you don't have that, but you have more complete remains from a close relative, then we would take those to fill in the blanks. Because if you take a fox, a coyote, and a wolf, obviously they are different animals. They look different from each other. They behave different. They're separate species, but they're all related to each other. And when you look at their skeletons, they're very, very similar. So even if there's some, minor variation in the exact shape and proportion of the process on this vertebra or the head of this limb bone or really minor. Generally the bones from one would probably be an okay substitute to fill in the blanks on another. And then, kind of your worst case scenario, if you have, there are some cases where we have entire groups of animals that we can tell they're all related to each other, but everyone that we have is incomplete, which is so frustrating. Worst case scenario, you do the same thing where you kind of use those pieces from all these different related species and combine them together to basically say this is what you maybe won't want it to represent one specific species from that group, but it's okay, this is a generalized member of XYZ group.
Yeah.
So there's a really interesting group of dinosaurs that is kind of one of our big mysteries right now called the Megaraptorans.
Oh, nice.
Just a great name. They're mostly known from South America, Australia, and parts of Southeast Asia. There might be some from Africa. I can't remember off the top of my head. The first one that was found was an isolated claw, which looked like a dromaeosaur or raptor's like sickle claw. So it was thought they were basically giant dromaeosaurs.
Yeah.
And then we found another specimen, and it was attached to a hand, and it's a huge thumb claw. They're all very fragmentary. And so there's enough that we've kind of finally gotten to a point where we have a pretty accurate picture just from all these different scattered specimens of what, like I said, what your average Megaraptoran would look like.
Mm-hmm.
So that's cool. Now the problem is trying to actually figure out where they fit in the tree, because their exact relationships are uncertain. Sorry to get into a tangent, but I will say
no worries.
They might be a group of tyrannosaurs, so relatives of T-Rex and its kin, but a unique early radiation where most tyrannosaurs are known from the northern hemisphere, and the big evolutionary trend that they followed over time was that their arms shrunk because they put all of they specced into giant head with giant mouth that just, why do I need separate things to grab prey and then kill it when I could just do it with my gigantic head full of railroad spike teeth? And Megaraptorans, if they end up being tyrannosaurs, they'll be really interesting because they're known from the southern hemisphere, and they basically took the opposite approach where they still have a big enough head and big enough teeth to like do the dirty work of killing and eating their prey, but their arms are just huge.
Oh, wow.
They have really large arms with these just ridiculously huge claws. It looks like they basically like have sickles attached to the end of their fingers.
That's so cool.
So yeah, there might just be this this group, this one particular set of this group of animals that saw what all their relatives were doing and were like, we're going to do the opposite. TBD though, we need more specimen.
That's so cool. That's so cool.
And again, that's the thing that's so exciting about paleontology is kind of you have a chance to solve a mystery. And as a paleoartist, you kind of get a chance to, like I said, if you're working on an incomplete animal, maybe more specimens will come along and prove that your reconstruction, was not it.
Yeah.
But in a weird way, you're sort of at least visually contributing to the science in that, like, you are creating an image that, again, it's a time capsule of what our understanding was at that time. And so to me, it's really cool to like look at the history of paleoart and see our understanding evolve and improve.
Yeah. Oh man, that's super
really
cool.
Fascinating. And I guess that as I am good at doing, I've taken us kind of off of our initial topic. But the point is, what all those examples show, again, there is a process that we follow to fill in the gaps in our knowledge that kind of requires you understanding and being informed about something. And it's, we're not just taking wild guesses and hoping we get it right. It's not a trendy thing. We don't give a bunch of dinosaurs feathers now because we just decided they would look kind of cool or funny that way. We do it because we found a ton of dinosaurs preserved with feathers, so we know that we had them. And again, I think that really unfortunately boils down to just people not really understanding science and the process of it. And by extension on my end, because I'm I'll be the first to admit I'm not a scientist. I collaborate with scientists, but no maths for me, thank you. But I'm doing stuff based on the science and what scientists are telling me, and on doing research and approaching it from an informed perspective. I'm not just eyeballing a skeleton and going, maybe it had polka dots. You can't prove it, because even then, that's a case of like, there are actually some dinosaurs where now we know their color, which is really cool, because when I was a kid, that was something that like we didn't think would ever be possible. That said, for most dinosaurs, most prehistoric animals in general, we don't know what colors they were. That doesn't mean that anything goes, right? An animal with like a brown body and a white underbelly and like black spots or stripes is not as equally likely as a neon green animal with purple polka dots, or an animal that's plaid, because there aren't plaid animals today, right? What, like, I can't for sure prove that either one of those is correct, but one is so unlikely we don't actually need to consider it.
Right.
It's like, for better and for worse, the internet, like being the most open marketplace of ideas, doesn't mean that every idea has merit and needs to be even considered, right? Because if it's a marketplace of ideas, well, the way a marketplace works is generally, if something is in a marketplace, that means it has some value.
Somebody has to have perceived it of having value.
So, someone has to be like, yes, this is worthy of being here. Not every idea is worthy of not every idea has merit. Not every idea needs to be considered. And, sometimes it can be the kind of frustrating thing with like doing science communication is that, if you have people say, oh, you're making up, well, why didn't you consider this idea? Like at a certain point, if you're going to engage with it, which, that's its own fine line of like, do I give this time of day or do I just ignore it? But then if lots of people are asking it, at some point you have to say something. At a certain point, like you just kind of have to say, well, no, that's wrong. That is factually incorrect. And we know it is. And just, you have to be honest and be like, you're speaking from a position of ignorance. Like, I know more about this than you do. I'm an expert in my own way. I collaborate with the like actual working. I have a PhD at capital E experts. Experts have specialized knowledge that you do not. That's what makes them experts. If I have a cavity, I don't go to my mechanic. I go to my dentist. And if my check engine light comes on, I don't go to my dentist. I go to my mechanic.
Right.
Yeah. Specialized knowledge, but I don't know what it is about science that people are like, nah.
Well,
I know just as much as you do.
I think, so I'm thinking about this right now because, I think we've talked about this in the past, but, I was raised in a pretty conservative evangelical kind of environment. So I was raised, I was raised a creationist.
Right.
And I remember like, the whole idea of paleo art being a degree of, although again, we've added a million qualifications, guesswork, putting heavy quotes around that the fact that there's a degree of, an educated guess behind it was the piece of evidence that was often used. Is it was like, haha, like all of what you think these evolutionary species looks like, it's actually the thought of some damn artist, that's been looks at the bones and comes up with it. And I think part of this is there's been a really bad job at communicating like the public conception of science in that, the kind of communication and education has really struggled for a number of reasons we could get into, but we don't have to, but like, the defunding of so much.
For the sake of my line of work, it might be best to just
avoid that. Yeah.
Kind of say, if you know, you know.
Yeah. Just, maybe fund this education. But, so there's that. But then, I think I would also give to like, earlier on, you made a comment about how people think science is an ideology. And I think part of the problem here has also come from people who consider themselves really, like scientifically minded. I'm thinking of someone like a Sam Harris or figure like that who do genuinely say, oh yeah, we can pull philosophical ideas out of science. And they're trying to make it an ideology. And I think that that's actually set us really far back, because then it started to get everyone to think of it that way. And it's not that way. you can't.
Absolutely. And I mean, to some extent, like, there is a philosophy to science. I mean, like science has to be, science has to be ethical. There's, there are all kinds of cases of like, really interesting fossils or fossils that have been lost or whatever that, for one reason or another, there is like major ethical issues attached to them. And like, I'm very much the mindset that like, it doesn't matter how amazing or informative, a fossil is, if it took some kind of human suffering to get it, if there's some kind of shady or unethical practice happening to obtain it or to study it, we should not touch that. Do not touch that with a 10-foot pole, because no amount of knowledge, no increase in understanding is worth, is worth doing something unethical, is worth causing harm or hardship to another person, right? There's, it's like every like mad science character in TV.
Yeah.
But what of the cost? Like, the benefit of whatever knowledge you get from something should not outweigh the human impact of it. But yeah, again, it's like you said, it gets treated as an ideology, and so then it becomes an us versus them thing. And I think some of it is also definitely, I think a lot of it for most people, it's not people being, it's not people meaning anything bad, it's definitely not them being stupid. It's, there's a difference between ignorance and stupidity.
Yep.
Right. If you're, you can be very smart and still be ignorant. There are all kinds of subjects that I am completely ignorant about. I am not informed. My opinion should not be sought on them because it is not coming from any place of actual knowledge. And it's really, it's one of the things that's so useful about Paleoart and scientific illustration in general is it is a great way to communicate science and to help people understand it. And it's, it's something I really value about being able to do in my own, in my own small way.
Yeah.
But I think also, unfortunately, part of like the ignorance comes from, if there are, I'm trying to tread carefully with my wording a bit here. If someone is intentionally or not misleading you about a subject, whether they are purposefully misrepresenting the truth or are trying to tell you about something from their own position of ignorance, which is why, again, seek informed opinions on things. The thing that stuck out to me with you talking about your background and sort of the evidence for like scientists don't know what they're talking about, this is all made up. You said, aha, it's just something some artist thought up. It's, it's just an educated guess. And to me, it's like, well, that's very much burying the lead because it is putting all the weight on guess and just hoping we all let no one thinks about the educated part. Right. Again, it's not that we're winging it. We are like, at the end of the day, a lot of it is a guess, but it is a best guess. It's educated. It is based on all the evidence and knowledge that we have in relevant fields, relevant subjects. And, we really try to be, of course I can't find the word, try to be discerning in our art. Like for lack of a better way to put it, like I gatekeep my own art. I will very much like, I might do rough sketches on something and iterate on, a speculative feature, trying to fill something in. And I will be my own worst critic of like, does that really make sense? And again, that's where, as an artist, you consult with experts and you look at the literature and what's been published and what's been peer reviewed and try to figure out, am I on the right track here? Or at the very least, am I coming up with something that is plausible, that would make sense for whatever it is I'm reconstructing? Or am I just, am I coming up with something completely unreasonable? And as with anything, like there's a spectrum. Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with being a little speculative in Paleoart, in reconstructing prehistoric life, with maybe exploring a feature that might not be the most likely thing, but isn't necessarily impossible, as long as you can make some kind of justification for it.
Sure.
Like an example I would use is the Prehistoric Planet, the Apple TV Plus series, which was just like everything I wanted it to be and more. The second episode, I think, of the first season, Deserts, opens up with a segment with this animal called Dreadnoughtus. Another great name. It's a sauropod, one of the long-necked dinosaurs, one of the biggest ones that we know about, and actually one of the most complete too, because the interesting thing with sauropods, a lot of them are known from like vertebrae and hips and maybe a femur or a humerus. A lot of them don't have heads, because what's the thing that's most buried in meat and is going to take the longest time for scavengers to try to get to before it can be buried? It's all the stuff in the middle. Yeah. Head at the end of that long neck, that's the first thing that's going to pop off and float away.
Right.
Anyway, squirrel. Had to go on an ADHD tangent. The segment with Dreadnoughtus has, it's showing, so Prehistoric Planet, for folks at home who haven't seen it, I'm eating my own hair. I love having long hair. It's a pain in the ass. It's the whole idea of Prehistoric Planet. It's basically, what if planet Earth, but 66 million years ago? It's by its nature, it's speculative, but it has like a breeding colony of Dreadnoughtus, and the males are displaying and competing with each other for mates. And they depict the males inflating a series of air sacs going down their neck. Now, that's not something that we have preserved in any sauropod fossil. That is a completely speculative structure. And is it the most likely thing in the world? Maybe not. But birds, which are, of course, a type of dinosaur. Dinosaurs are still around. When you eat dinosaur nuggets, you are literally eating dinosaur nuggets. All birds have a system of air sacs that are connected to their respiratory system. It really helps reduce their weight, which is part of what helps them fly. It also makes their breathing very efficient because they'll take a breath in and some of that oxygenated air goes into the air sacs instead. And so whenever they breathe out, they're still getting like fresh air in their lungs.
Oh, okay.
Way more efficient than what we do. And we know that a lot of dinosaurs also had those air sacs because they have the same telltale cavities in their vertebrae that we see in birds, where it literally looks like a section of the vertebrae has been like carved out because the air sacs are actually invading the bone.
Oh, cool.
And this is actually one of the ways that we think dinosaurs, especially sauropods, are able to get so big, so much bigger than any modern land mammals, because for their size, they were surprisingly lightweight because they were kind of full of air.
Oh, that's really interesting.
And so when you see so we know that they had these air sacs going through their necks. And when you look at modern birds, birds like frigate birds or sage grouse or any of these birds that have these like weird inflatable display structures on their necks, those are just modifications of their air sac system. They're basically the air sac like actually sitting partly outside of the body and being able to be like consciously inflated. So we don't have direct evidence for any structures like that in sauropod dinosaurs. And it, in the scheme of things, maybe it's not the most likely thing for them to have, but we know they had that same system of air sacs. And so it's not unreasonable to speculate that, maybe some of them did have some kind of display structure built off of them, even if it's maybe not exactly the way it was depicted in the show. Like, that's totally okay. If there's anything that you learn from looking at living animals, it's that nature one-ups us on imagination every time. Yeah. There's so many weird features that you wouldn't expect and that aren't necessarily going to directly show up in the fossil record. It doesn't mean you can put anything on any animal. You can't just turn T-Rex into like a giant chicken. I don't know if you've seen the meme of like basically making T-Rex look like a pigeon. Like, just because that isn't preserved doesn't mean it's reasonable, because T-Rex is like, it's a 40-foot long, 8-ton animal. If you put a giant winter coat on it, that thing is going to be like dropping dead left and right from heat strokes. Like, well,
and wasn't that, I mean, again, very, very little knowledge on this subject, but it wasn't, I mean, the heat, the world's temperature was way higher at the time of dinosaurs, right?
It varied. It was, I think overall it was warmer. It doesn't mean it was like a hot house. There weren't jungles everywhere. There are dinosaur fossils known from parts of the world, like parts of northern Canada, parts of southern Australia, again, Antarctica, that even though the continents were in slightly different positions at the time, it was warmer. They, they would have still had like plenty of vegetation, lush forests, all those things. They would have actually been climatically not too different from Iowa or from parts of like the Pacific Northwest or temperate forests elsewhere in the world, where like they would have had seasonal weather. It would have probably gotten relatively cold at certain times of year, and there's a very good chance that there were dinosaurs that at least in some parts of the year lived in snow.
Oh, interesting.
And that's actually one of the other important things for paleontology and by extension paleoart is studying and understanding the environment. There's a lot we can learn from taking like core samples of soil, of looking under the microscope at like, are there preserved like seeds or plant spores or things like that. You can actually do analysis of like the trace chemicals in the teeth of fossil animals and actually
see what they were eating.
And that's one of the things I didn't touch on earlier, but that's also really important for informing our work as paleoartists, is trying to understand the environment and what role this animal had in it, because that makes a huge difference. A prey species is probably not going to be super brightly colored and bioluminescent, and
Right.
things to attract attention to itself because it doesn't want to get eaten. The flip side, you could also say a predator probably doesn't want to be crazy flashy either because it doesn't want to be seen by prey. Like, those things are really important, and that's actually the thing that's really cool about paleontology these days, and like studying it for paleoart, is it's such a multidisciplinary field. There is, to some extent, like there is just as much paleontology these days being done in the lab and being done like on computers and with statistical analyses and all these really detailed things as there is in the field with, people going and digging up bones and mapping out fossil sites and all those. And it's just the amount of information that we really can know. The amount of things that we do know and that we can even figure out is fascinating. And it's one of the things that makes it so interesting and so fun to depict. And not for the life of me remember where I heard this, but I remember reading a while back that it's sort of a shame that dinosaurs get treated as like this kiddie fair and something for children. And I'm guilty of this myself too, because I tend to oversimplify what I do as, I draw dinosaurs. I'm a kid who never outgrew his dinosaur phase.
This episode will likely be entitled Drawing Dinosaurs.
Yes, which it's not wrong. But God, I wish for the life of me I could remember where I read this, because it was so cool and so profound that like dinosaurs should be one of the most interesting subjects for art, because even though, like I said earlier, paleontology is kind of, the crossroads of biology and geoscience with a little chemistry and statistics and all these other things sprinkled in spirit, in some ways, the closest thing to it is astronomy, because astronomy and paleontology are both fields that represent the absolute limit of our ability to understand things from a distance in space and distance in time. And the fact that, we can learn so much about our universe by looking through telescopes and sending out, probes and satellites from our one tiny little rock in it. And that we can learn so much about the ancient history of our world from things that are preserved in the rocks beneath our feet. That's just incredible.
Of course, it's amazing.
And it's one of the things that makes me so sad about how much doubt there is that some people have about the subject, and how much, especially conspiracies. Like, to me, it's just at a certain point, it's like, I mean, some of it's, again, it's ignorance. It's like, oh, you're in an echo chamber that's really uninformed and logically flawed. But some of it is like, at a certain point, to me, just if you doubt every single thing that scientists say, one, God, what a horrible way to live that must be. You must be just completely paranoid about everything. That must be exhausting. But also, to me, it makes me kind of sad, because to me, it sort of implies just kind of a like almost profound lack of curiosity.
Well, yeah, I think it closes you off from a real sense of awe that you can get out of things. I off mic mentioned the podcast QAnon Anonymous. They had an episode at one point that I think a few a little bit back about some conspiracy theory, but I remember they were making this comment where they were talking about these TikTokers who are using you're looking at photographs of buildings with really cool architecture and trying to like speculate, if it was secretly made by an ancient civilization or whatever. And what they were commenting was just like, man, you're missing out on just the ability to just see how cool this architecture is. You're not actually spending the time to just be in awe of it.
Yeah.
And then, like, I don't know, for me, talking about my own background with creationism and evangelicalism, and speaking as someone who still considers himself religious, one thing that was really great about letting go of that, in my teens, and just being like okay with evolution, with paleontology being a genuine field, was I've had much more of a sense of awe at things. And if you are a religious person, instead of going, oh, this doesn't fit my worldview, you can go, Jesus Christ, that's amazing. God made dinosaurs. You know what I mean? Like, you can do that.
And that's the thing, is it's like, I'm not a religious person myself, but like, I've got past my like obnoxious teenage atheist phase, thank God.
Yeah.
I have no issue with being religious, and like there are tons of scientists who have absolutely no issue reconciling their faith with their work and their understanding of the world. Like it's most scientists that I know of who are who actually study paleontology and evolutionary biology and other things and are religious, my understanding is they basically just view it as like, yeah, that's God's mechanism for creation, and like that's all well and good, right? You can totally reconcile them, and but what's interesting bringing that up, and the thing that I find so perplexing and kind of disheartening too, when I especially get comments from it, is like this whole crowd that's arisen on social media, and especially like on TikTok, of like, dinosaurs aren't real. It's all a conspiracy. It's all made up. Some of it is definitely like really, really fundamentalist religious people. And it is definitely that, that very fundamentalist, like my belief, my worldview just is not compatible with this. And the only way I can justify it is by invoking conspiracy. And, as someone with an understanding of the subject and who cares about like, reality and like understanding the history of the world as it actually was, like, it annoys me, but I also understand where someone is coming from when it's like that. Like that's totally, I can understand the mental disconnect and why they default to that. Like that is very, very understandable. What really throws me off with a lot of this, like, dinosaurs aren't real crowd, is a lot of them, it doesn't seem to be like a religious thing. It's just like a conspiracy theory thing, just a belief in conspiracies, and just this idea that like, oh, all history that was taught to us is wrong. What are they hiding from you? And if it's so bizarre to me, because I mean, it's true of any conspiracy. It's like, what is the benefit to the people trying to pull it off? What, right? Like, to control. How is it controlling me? How does someone making me believe that there used to be these big ass reptiles that roamed the planet and then went extinct? How does that control me? What's the benefit? What is the end goal? It doesn't make sense. And then just think about the logistics. I mean, even for, as we said earlier, being a very young science, like paleontology has still been a formal science for 2 centuries. Hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people around the world, in countries that like do not like each other, all collaborating in this like joint field. And yes, there are disagreements. Yes, there are arguments. Yes, there are controversies. But like, my God, the making the Illuminati look like book club level shadow organization that would be needed to pull off that conspiracy. It doesn't make sense. It's just impossible.
This was the very first podcast I did when I first started that was partially about conspiracy theories. We were looking at stuff like that. And a big conclusion we'd come to oftentimes is the conspiracies that end up being true are much more boring than you think. And
well, and the reason we know about them is because it's the rule with every conspiracy. There is just a certain threshold where if it gets too big, it can't be hidden. Someone is going to talk, something's going to leak. There's just, at a certain scale, conspiracies don't work. And we know that because we know about real life conspiracies because they got too big.
Right.
I mean, came out because you can't, there are only so many holes that you can plug.
Well, this is because like one of the classic ones that a lot of conspiracy theorists, like to reference, and I'm also really interested in it for historical reasons, is MK Ultra, right? It was CIA experiments, that were done it came out eventually. People did, journalists were like, what the fuck is going on with these weird bills that are going nowhere, and they filed Freedom of Information Act stuff, and they figured it out. There was a giant internal investigation,
yeah, there was, sometimes when there's smoke, there's just smoke. But, with conspiracies, at a certain point, if there's a hell of a lot of smoke, there's fire. And usually there's a hell of a lot of smoke because the fire is out of control because it got too big.
Yeah.
And so there's it's that weird logical inconsistency and that thing of just, and I think it represents a larger thing that kind of scares me of just how like in vogue conspiracy culture is. Like, God, nothing is like an instant red flag for me on a dating app, quite like seeing someone be like, tell me your favorite conspiracy theory. Nope.
Nope.
Nope. We are not treating those like fun bar trivia, because at a certain point, those go to some very scary and problematic belief systems.
There's what is it that floats around a lot? There's like the pyramid that somebody made of all the conspiracies.
The last level is the anti-Semitic point of no return. Yeah, exactly. And so,
because of course it goes there. I mean, what we're talking about, like, the only way paleontology can be a conspiracy if it's a giant worldwide thing. Oh, that sounds like some other conspiracy.
If it makes the Illuminati look like book club, like my God, it's not feasible. And to some extent, I mean, the whole thing with conspiracies is it's not necessarily the internal logic that matters, or even if the different conspiracies agree with each other. It's just the idea that there is a conspiracy. But it's so strange to me that some of this real denial and the most vitriolic response that I get to my artwork or my videos, my attempts at like communication on this subject that I am passionate about and am, actually, knowledgeable of, actually have some expertise in. It's like the most vitriolic responses and the most closed-minded, you are just making this up, isn't coming from a fundamentalist background. And it's so perplexing to me. Like, I don't know if you ever, I don't know if it's been in the Varied Industries building in the last few years, but there used to be for a long time at the Iowa State Fair that like one booth in the Varied Industries building that was this creationist booth that had, I was so excited to see it as a kid and then so disappointed because I just saw the banner with dinosaurs in it. But like, my experience, the majority of young Earth creationists like believe in dinosaurs.
Because they just think they were at the same time as humans.
Like, like, how do you know they're real? Because we found them. Because we have their body parts. Because we have their damn skeletons. Like,
this is a whole can of worms we don't want to open too much because I could get really into this. But yeah, because this is a big part of what happened in the development of creationist thought is that there's a certain point where there's too much evidence. And so there was like this attempt to kind of rebrand into creation science rather than like complete conspiracy, which is still pseudoscience, but like, trying to have more of a respectable facade to it.
My Roman Empire is the prehistoric animal models in the Ark Encounter, which are actually some of the most like lifelike and well done and accurate paleo reconstructions I've ever seen. They have, of all things, I love, if you can't beat them, join them, I guess. They have one of the prehistoric animals they have on display in the Ark is an animal called Pakicetus, which is the earliest known whale, which was a four-legged, like fully terrestrial wolf-like animal. It was like one of the like most famous transitional fossils, most famous like pieces of evidence for evolution. The thing you'd think they would ignore, it's on the Ark Encounter. And it's like one of the best reconstructions I've ever seen of this animal. And I'm like, oh my God, we need to get a crew together. We need to go on a heist. We need to save the really good paleo art.
This is oh man, this is such because talking Ark Encounter, this is Ken Ham is who I was gesturing at actually with the creation science thing because that was his shit. I have been to the Creation Museum. I have been there.
Even though it's really weird, again, not to get too far into the weeds just to be safe, but like from my understanding of and exposure to that, it's interesting that it's like the Creation Museum and Ark Encounter doesn't even seem to be like the universal like belief among creationists. It seems to be it's one. Ken Ham's particular flavor of it. It's so, but again, it's the thing that's just I don't have an answer to why it is, but it's just so perplexing to me that like the crowd that you would think would be the most like they're not real, you're all making it up. Like they don't get me wrong. Like when I get comments from them, like they can definitely be a bit angry, be a bit venomous, but like they at least come at it with the approach of like no, they totally accept that these things were real. They just fundamentally.
They're squishing the time scale usually.
They just think that my evidence-based interpretation of them is just completely wrong. But they will at least accept that, like, yes, these things were real, and they used to live on Earth, and now they don't. They're gone. And then it's these like I don't know. I can't see some like religious or other like. At least I can understand where you're coming from. Just patient for like the people who are just like, you are a liar. You are making it all up. Are just I have no idea why.
Yeah, well, it's because I mean, there's something else taking place right now that I think it's interesting you're emphasizing this, because there's a shift going on kind of in social media where like the Christian fundamentalist type conspiratorial stuff, it's falling more out of vogue, but what's rising is almost scarier. It's the QAnon stuff. It's the deeply paranoid person who spent 8 hours on their computer just going crazy.
Well, it's the for me, it's just, again, it's what's so bizarre is the just this like unwillingness to accept that any like known accepted mainstream science, history, prehistory could possibly be correct, to the point where it all has to be fake, it all has to be made up. And again, it's like, well, why? What's the possible benefit of that? And again, like I said, it's like for whatever and choosing my word carefully, all opinions are my own, not my employer's. For whatever personal disagreements, frustrations, confusion I may have over their beliefs, at least the like young Earth creationist crowd is willing to meet me in the middle of, yes, dinosaurs are real, and we know they're real because we have dug up their bones. It's like we have the actual physical pieces of them in front of us. It's pretty hard to ignore.
We're so cooked that's now a more reasonable position than the general conspiratorial position on this.
The bar is underground, fossilizing as we speak. Future paleontologists will, when we all die out and the sapient crows take over and start digging up our remains, they will find the bar and go, "Oh, that's where it ended up. God, that's really low." Yeah.
I'll quickly say I'll link in the show notes. I did an old episode of VLVC on creationism where we specifically talk through the Ark encounter and all of that. And there's without getting too political, there was some shady business decisions that were made in the creation of those things.
I'm at least aware enough of that. That said, again, just to tread with some opinions, my own, not employers. Maybe that is also maybe this is the point to pivot to the other thing that we initially talked about bringing up.
Well, after explaining just how complex and involved this field is and doing paleoart is, can we just replace it with a robot, you think?
No. No, absolutely not. And we shouldn't. And the fact that people with brainworms think that we can is bad. So yeah, I think actually the whole reason you reached out to me of like, hey, do you want to come on the podcast was after
I think it was originally this.
A tweet I did raking someone over the coals for using AI art to represent like some kind of recent paleontological discovery. It was a new species of pterosaur.
The AI problem of like with at least early days was having like 20 fingers on someone's hands or something like that. Yeah, you don't maybe want that maybe doing scientific illustrations. I don't know.
Yeah, so I suppose I should start by taking a step back with why do I and like every artist I know have such major issues with AI. Here's the thing. AI in general, I am not opposed to. I think it can be a great thing. I think there are plenty of uses for it. From my own experience, I actually started at the news station in the archive, digitizing and cataloging all the old tapes from like the 80s. And the way that we actually cataloged them was that we would digitize the tapes, and then that raw video went through this machine learning algorithm that would actually split them up into the individual stories and auto transcribe them, which was really, really helpful for us then to actually go through and organize and catalog them. And that's AI. And that's a really great use for it.
Quick example of, also like just with this podcast, I occasionally put out promo videos of an episode that have captions, and I usually use Adobe Premiere's AI auto captioning.
So as a whole, AI is not a bad thing. The problem with that I and so many other artists and creatives have specifically is with generative AI. Because the whole way generative AI works is you train it on a data set. Say, this is what, whether it's it's an image or, writing for like ChatGPT or things like that.
Mhm.
You trained it on a bunch of data saying, this is what this thing that we want you to output looks like. And it uses that to basically imitate and reconstruct whatever it is that you're trying to get. The more data that you train it on, the more precise and more sophisticated it gets. The more people use it and, start getting patterns with like putting in these specific prompts, wanting these specific things, getting these specific results. The more sophisticated and precise it gets, which sounds cool. The problem is that all of the data that literally every generative AI program is based on, Midjourney, DALL-E, ChatGPT, literally all of them, is just mountains and mountains and mountains of copyrighted data, copyrighted writing, artwork, all stuff that has been just scraped from the web without permission from the artists, from the people who actually hold the copyright, the rights to it, without compensation. None of that. Just been scraped and fed into the training data. And, it's to the point where like there's a reason like one of the most popular AI prompts for image generators is trending on ArtStation. It's really just scraping from the front stage of ArtStation, this like industry portfolio website for professional artists. People will specifically, my roommate's dad is actually an independent artist, and there was an internal document from Midjourney that leaked a few months ago of artists whose work they were specifically like scraping and feeding into the algorithm to imitate their style.
And it was him?
His dad was on the list.
Oh my God.
And like the CEO of OpenAI just straight up admitted like it only works if they use copyrighted material. So it's theft. It's plagiarism, plain and simple. And that's why artists like myself, we are so against it because it's unethical. It's plagiarism. It is stealing the work of actual human artists to essentially to try to replace us. I mean, why should some lazy book publisher hire an artist for a cover when they can just plug some words into a program and spit something out that, if you don't look at any of the details, I guess is passable.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where it gets particularly dangerous is any way in which it's trying to replace like something that somebody would have been doing for money. I've seen more and more like advertisements clearly using AI, or like ads on the internet or like promos for movies, stuff like that. That's where it's really like functionally like what these AI image generation is good for is making something funny. That's pretty much it. Like that's really it.
But even then I'm like I hate like I will see a meme that makes me laugh, and then I realize it's AI generated, and it just completely deflates me.
It ruins it.
The fact, but it's part of the problem is the way that these programs keep getting more sophisticated and keep doing a better job of imitating real artists is if people use them. Whether it's to
That's
actually get an illustration instead of paying a person to do it, or just to generate a meme. Every time someone uses it, it compounds the problem. And I'm not saying that you should, feel guilty if you just one day tried out making a silly little AI picture.
Typing in buff minion
again,
or something.
Again, it's ignorance. Like people don't know, they don't know. But like I say it because it's important to understand why even that makes artists so upset. Because it might not seem like a big deal in the scheme of things. And, maybe that one buff minion meme that you made is a drop in the bucket, but like,
right.
It's still contributing to the bucket.
Right.
So that's the general issue. And it sucks too, because like on paper, I think generative AI could actually be a really cool thing and a really cool tool.
Right. Especially if it wasn't at threat of taking jobs,
and I think, I think it would maybe be, it would be lazy if you just because I've seen some people do this online and get caught red-handed. It's of like, oh, I'll just generate an image and then paint over it and I'm the real artist. Like, no. It could be interesting, I think, at least for for ideation, for just trying to get some wheels turning, as long as you're not using it for the basis of your work. Keyword there could be if any of these generators were ethically sourced. If they were built on a database where artists willingly opted in and contributed work to it, got compensated for it, and like, you know, where everything that was in there was above board. All the data was stuff that was, you know, that was grabbed the right way. And like with willing participation, because like now with like Adobe can basically take your work and feed it into their AI, and you have to actually physically go in and opt out of it. It automatically opts you in, which is just, it's so gross and so sleazy. Like, you know, again, it could be cool if they had done it as like a, hey, if you want to contribute to helping us grow our version in our database, and even framing it as like, help us build one that artists will want to use because we did this the right way. But no, they didn't. They just automatically made it, we're going to scrape your stuff as you work on it, unless you physically hunt down the random hidden checkbox that says, no, don't do that. So that's the general issue with generative AI and AR. So aside from all the ethical issues, using
just aside from those,
aside from the like huge moral problem that's, you know, affecting entire creative industries and people's livelihoods, aside from that little pesky detail, the other big problem with it for Paleoart and for any kind of scientific illustration is that despite the name, artificial intelligence is not intelligent. It doesn't do research. It doesn't thoughtfully approach things. It just does its best to imitate what's already out there and spit out what you think it wants. It's not doing research. It's not being accurate. It is an amalgamation of whatever is in its training data. And what's in its training data might not be accurate. If you look at AI-generated images of dinosaurs, they're basically all polluted with Jurassic Park toys.
Well, I mean, this is what popped into my head as you're describing this already, is like, we've just talked through how, you know, how much this field has evolved
and how labor intensive and careful we are with it.
Right. Yeah. But also, you know, like those previously accurate for the time illustrations, if the AI is pulling from those.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And like, you know, there's things where like I saw a while back, like an AI generated Triceratops image, and it kind of had that, like those telltale signs of even like good AI images where like it looks kind of waxy. It looks like there's layer of Vaseline on it. There's weird like lines and textures that just flow into each other. But like, I realized like, oh my God, like the eye, part of the jaw, like the shape, even though it was supposed to be a Triceratops, that's the Jurassic Park T-Rex. Just because there's so many images of it out there, just in, you know, dinosaur, like if you search dinosaur, there's so many images of it. That's what it's pulling from to generate the image. And granted, that was just from some random advertisement. But if you're using it for a scientific illustration, like as like the press artwork to accompany a new paper, where you're talking about, hey, we just named this new species. Here's its unique features. The things that make it interesting, the things that make it stand out from other members of the family, and then your image that's going with it is AI generated, and it's just this generic, like doesn't look like any of these species. Illustration with like random nonsensical anatomy and all these other things. Like, you know, not only does it just look bad, not only was it not ethically created, it misleads people. You are actively doing yourself a disservice if you do that. And there have been a few cases just in the last couple months of journals that were either maybe kind of shady, like pay to publish predatory journals, or just journals with maybe really, really lazy review boards that have had to like come out and apologize or retract things when figures in a paper or a cover or a press artwork was AI generated.
Oh, so this has happened. That's what I was going to ask, if this has happened.
And they were like, this is nonsensical. There was like some random biomedical paper that had like a rat, like an AI generated lab rat, with some random like pillar of flesh coming off of it that genuinely looks like, you know, that one episode of South Park where Mrs. Garrison realizes she actually does identify as a man and has the scientists grow her a new penis on a lab rat.
Yeah, it looks like that.
And then there were all these like random, like, you know, bits of call out text pointing to random parts of the rat with the giant AI dong's body with just nonsense text. You know, there was one that was just pointing to it and just said in like that weird, like not quite correct AI text where like it actually spit out a word, but in like kindergarten front, rat. and the thing, and like, you know, it is funny.
Yeah.
But part of what makes it funny is because it's so ridiculously obvious. And if anyone had bothered to examine it or care, it, you know, like, how the hell did this get through peer review? That no one should have touched this. It should not have gone through. And, you know, that case is funny just because it was kind of nonsensical. But I think the you know, the tweet that sort of inspired this whole discussion was some blue check on Twitter. I know what we're supposed to call it now, but I refuse because I guess the floodgates have been open. We can cuss. I fucking despise Elon Musk. I hate that man with a passion. Anyway, it was some blue check who like linked to like, I don't know, their own lazy article or whatever about this new pterosaur, this new pterodactyl, quote unquote, flying reptile that had been discovered with some AI image that he'd generated that looked like some weird combination of like a pop culture like Discount Ray Harryhausen pterodactyl and the banshees, the flying things from Avatar on some random nonsensical like clip art jungle background. Like, it was terrible. And so aside from just not looking like any animal that's ever lived ever, really, you know, it didn't look anything like the real animal, which is actually really cool because it's this new pterosaur with this like really crazy huge crest on its head. Like it looks like it basically looks like its entire head looks like it's just got a big semicircle sticking out of the top. It doesn't look it's a really crazy and interesting looking animal. And there was this really fantastic press artwork that like every popular science reporting site was using by Dr. Mark Witton, who is a paleontologist and amazing paleoartist. I actually have next to me, he literally wrote the book on the subject, the Paleoartist Handbook.
Oh, wow.
Like the guy. There was this beautiful artwork that, you know, would not have been hard if he was like trying to report it as like an actual news outlet, which I don't think he was, but we'll give him the benefit of the doubt here. I'm sure it would have been really easy to get permission from the publisher, because that's kind of the whole point. Like, having made press artwork, that's kind of the whole point. Like, it's in the contract that you sign with them that like, we have these usage rights, we are allowed to distribute it to other outlets with credit. Which that's also the thing. It's like, you know, to a certain extent, when you get commissioned for artwork, you kind of know that it's not entirely going to be yours. That like, once you give it over to your client, it's kind of theirs to do with as they wish. And that's where I usually stipulate in my contract that, like, you know, I still get usage rights for, you know, for personal promotion and for portfolio work. And then if it came down to it, if like someone else reached out to me and wanted to use it in a publication, that's where I'd reach out to, you know, my original client or to whatever, you know, publisher I you know, published the illustration that, or published the thing that the illustration was in, and be like, can I license? Am I okay to license this? Do we need to renegotiate something for that? Like, but for the most part, like, you kind of know it's somewhat out of your hands, and it's just like, if you pay me and give me credit when you use it, I'm fine with that. Yeah. And so to use this artwork really, it's garbage. To use this image that is the way it is created is by plagiarizing who knows how many people who aren't getting credit or compensation, and is misleading. It's just, you know, if you're just reporting on this as a science communicator, it's lazy. If you do this as a scientist, oh my God, why? Do you not care about people actually understanding your
discovery?
Like, you're actively misleading people. And you know, like, I get sometimes, especially in some countries, like, they might not really have a budget for artwork, and it sucks. But, you know, even if it's not like newly made artwork to like illustrate your new species or something, at the very least, like, there are websites like there's like Paleostock, Studio 252 million years ago. There are different sites, Science Photo Library even, where you could, for like 25, 30, $40, like, you can pay and license at least an illustration of like another member of that group, and you could at least say like, in the caption or the press stuff, this new species is a close relative of blah 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 pictured here.
Yeah.
Like there are ways around it. Or hell, if in general I definitely prefer to work for money.
Mm-hmm.
But if there was some need for it and we negotiated on it and made sure everything was ironclad in writing and agreed upon, if there was someone who was like, hey, we're looking for art for a publication, we don't really have a huge budget, we'll probably take a lot of sweet talking, but like I'm sure some other artists would probably be willing to do some work, maybe not to the full extent you would for something else, right? Maybe not quite as rendered, quite as detailed, but do something and maybe have it be like, okay, I will do it. And as payment, you are going to send me a physical copy of the final publication. No charge. I don't have to pay for shipping. You can at least cover the cost of that. Like maybe we can work something out.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not saying that I don't want to give anyone ideas that you should ask artists to work for free, because that is incredibly rude. Like, anytime someone is like, oh, well, I have a big page, I have lots of followers, so you'll get lots of exposure. You'll get credit. I can't pay my rent with exposure and credit. I need money to pay my rent. Don't ask artists to work for free, but I bring that up more as like, even if you're in a pinch, there are options. There are options that aren't super expensive to get some kind of artwork with your stuff. There are artists who are probably willing to go pro bono if you figure out some kind of other form of compensation that they are amenable to. Like, there are solutions. And I think in general, that is what like gets so emotionally exhausting with AI art, with AI images. I keep calling them art, but is that like, aside from the fact that, again, unethical with my specific line of work, it is misleading. It is like actively working against the entire point of what I do. But and the fact that so many people peddling it are just the most obnoxious human beings you could possibly interact with. Because
they don't do themselves any favors.
Of course. It's the fact that like there's no other way to put it. The only reason I can see for using it is just pure apathy and laziness. And maybe you can get away with that if you're like some small, some like person self-publishing their own book and you don't have the budget for a cover or whatever. I'd still think it was kind of lazy because, again, there are other options, but like, hey, whatever. But you're doing it for science communication, for scientific publication. Like, oh my God, why? Like, it's the only thing you are going to do, aside from maybe opening yourself up to legal liability, because, again, who knows what copyrighted work went into this thing that you don't have permission to use. I say that as someone who is like, we have to be very conscientious about using other people's stuff at my job and making sure, like, do we have permission to use this? Do we need to give you an on-screen credit? Like, what steps do we need to follow? Is there a limitation how long we can use? All these things. So just completely ignoring that and going, yeah, it's probably fine. Ooh, that's old move, Cotton. See how that plays out. But it's just, what a way to instantly torpedo your credibility. Yeah. Look at the recent response to A24 getting caught using AI generated
for Civil War.
War. And everyone like came out, and I guess it's apparently if it's actors and screenwriters, it's fine, but artists don't count. Screw them. But like, they came out of the writer's strike as like one of the good ones. The ones that like that the union said, yeah, we will still work with them during the strike because they are doing what they're supposed to. Yeah. Like, they were one of the good ones. And then just one dumb, lazy marketing move. What a way to instantly torpedo people's goodwill toward you. And that's the thing that is also like so perplexing to me, especially with the sciences, not just paleontology, but all sciences where visuals, illustration, the arts are so intertwined with them, so important for actually communicating and getting their work out and getting it out to the general public and helping them understand it. Like that working relationship they have with artists is so important, and it's hilarious, but also sad and kind of maddening to watch them all just go, just be so shocked when they do this thing that artists have been screaming about for years now. Don't do this. Yeah. It's just like, I don't understand why you would like it has to be a completely like out of touch boardroom decision. Why would you shoot yourself in the foot like that? And again, because it really wrecks your credibility. It wrecks your reputation with artists, with scientists who care about this stuff. Because there are going to be lazy people who don't really care in all sides of it. But like, I think your average scientist wants to have their work well represented. Right. That's why when I've done illustrations for scientists, I get feedback from them and I make sure they approve it. And, they don't just go, well, that's not quite right, but it's fine, whatever. Let's just get this thing out the door. Like, no, they want to have it done right too.
Right.
And so yes, if you are an academic publisher, if you are making any kind of science communication, science content, if you are an actual scientific publication and you're thinking about using AI images, save a few bucks. Don't. Just don't.
Just don't.
Let's to use one of my parents' favorite sayings for when my brother and I were little. Let's not and say we did. Except actually, let's just not. Let's just not at all. No and say we did. Let's just not. Don't do it.
Oh man.
It's just like I said. It's so frustrating because we've spent like
almost 2 hours,
almost 2.5 hours now, like discussing like how much care and work goes into this, and again, how much like we are willing to be like, yep, we got that wrong. We have better evidence now, and we're hopefully on the right track. And if we're still not quite there, how exciting it is to know how much more there is to see how much more there is to learn. Like so much effort and thought and care put into this, or we could just put out completely misleading slop. Okay. And potentially get in legal trouble because, hey, that thing that sort of looks like the Getty Images logo that's randomly appearing in your image. Yeah, I'm pretty sure there's still a lawsuit going on about that. You probably don't appreciate that. Like, it's, it feels very much, it's the leopards ate my face party of the art world. Like, I can't believe that, but the leopards weren't supposed to eat my face. Faces, and you have one. So what did you expect?
Well, I think we probably should move toward wrapping up here because, as you did mention, we have hit about 2 hours here. Yeah. But this has been fantastic. Is there any final comment you want to make, and then maybe anything you want to plug or whatever?
Oh my gosh, it's see, normally I'm the one asking that of like, any last comments? Anything you wish we'd asked? Not really. I think we've pretty much covered all the basics. I guess one thing I will say, and I'll do kind of the Cliff Notes version so we can wrap up here. For anyone who wants to be a paleoartist, who's interested in going in the field and wants to actually get in there, how do you get in there? I will say, this is true from what I know of kind of all art careers. You don't need to go to art school to become an artist. Ultimately, what's going to get you jobs, what's going to get you noticed, what is important is the strength of your portfolio. Now, I did go to art school and I found it really helpful. Like critiques were good, and it's whether it is in a formal school setting, whether you're looking at books, online tutorials, you're self-taught, first and foremost, you do need to be able to make art. You need to learn the basics. You need to learn the fundamentals of art. Paleoart is still art. You need to learn that basic stuff. You need to do your still lifes. You need to do your learning how to shade a circle, learning how to do lines, learning how to do perspective, shading, all these things. Like I will be the first to admit that there are some fundamentals I need to brush up on. You gotta crawl before you can walk, before you can run. And if it isn't obvious from what we said already, do some research. You need to study animal anatomy, study plants, study ecology, like learn as much as you can about modern life, learn as much as you can about paleontology, read papers, read the actual research. There will be a learning curve of learning to actually understand the jargon. I still have lots of times I need to look up particular terms. That's how scientific publications are. They're kind of like sheet music. They're meant to be understood by people who can read it, and you're going to have to learn to read it. You need those two knowledge bases. Yeah. Other than that, as far as like actually getting your foot in the door, social media is great for that. Like Twitter has been kind of my most consistent source of commissions. Don't be afraid to reach out and communicate with scientists, especially if there's research you're trying to read. There's lots of stuff behind paywalls, and while unfortunately there isn't some kind of a hub that lets you get around them, a sci-hub, if you will, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. For the most part, my understanding is scientists don't really make a dime from publishing. In fact, they usually have to pay to get published in a journal.
Yeah.
So they are not at all going to be upset if you reach out to them and nicely,
politely,
right, like have some manners. If you ask, hey, would you be willing to send a copy of this research, of this paper? My experience has been that they are all more than happy to send you stuff. Like they want their work to be read.
In the worst case scenarios, they say no.
Yes,
you'll
the worst
be okay.
they can say is no, and you do what you can to find that information elsewhere. And just like making those connections, getting your work out there, getting it seen. Especially like if you're not in a formal school setting, don't be afraid to ask for critiques. Unfortunately, online there are people who will just be dicks. But like artists want to help other artists get better and grow. And if you're willing to take some criticism, like all good critiques, they will make sure to compliment what you're doing well and then tell you what you can improve on. Like you're willing to accept that, to keep working, to keep growing, and to make those connections, that will go a long way for you. I can't promise it's something that will turn into a full-time career. It's not my full-time job, but the way I've gotten it is the way I've been able to make any money from it at all is by making connections with people. My first commission came from not just the knowledge and the skills that I have as a paleoartist, but from also making that personal connection with a paleontologist and making myself, known to him, not just as a student, but known to him outside of that student-teacher relationship as someone who could, be someone to turn to for that. And, don't, like I said, don't be afraid to put yourself out there to get some things wrong. Both from like an art standpoint and from I was off the mark with that. Like it's, there are, as with any very specific niche interest, there are weird nerds who will just nitpick your stuff to death without understanding it. And it does get annoying and it does get tiring. The block button does exist for a reason, and it's actually okay for you to use it. Like don't be afraid of just making people unable to interact with you because they're weird and annoying. That's fine. That's good. But yeah, just doing the work and practicing and getting yourself out there, that will go a long way. And you know what? It doesn't necessarily have to be a full-time career. I'm actually, having gone to school for art, thinking of like, I want to find a career in the arts. I'm kind of glad that I didn't, because it didn't, my lifelong hobby didn't just turn into work. It's still my hobby that I'm lucky enough to get paid for. And I'm very happy with that. And it's taken a few years. I'm still definitely a small fish in a big pond, but again, I kept working on improving my art, on getting better at doing research, at seeking advice, at making those connections and getting myself out there, and it's paid off. So, if you want to be a paleoartist, if you want to find any kind of career in the arts, there isn't necessarily a set path you have to follow. You just need to make sure that you're putting in the work, you're putting in the practice, and just without being, don't be overbearing, don't be a pest, have manners. But just put yourself out there. You will be amazed how, for both this field and really any field, how far just making yourself known and being nice and being pleasant to interact with and showing an eagerness to learn, it's amazing how far that will carry you.
And I mean, Paleoart is one of those fields that I think is something that a lot of people don't even know is really exists or really think about. And so maybe that's one thing to throw out there too, is I think what there might be is a good chance of people listening to this that are artists, and happen to also be interested in biology. Hey, consider these two things can combine.
Yeah. And you know what? It doesn't have to be your thing, but it's kind of cool to know that it's out there. And there are things that it overlaps with that are just as interesting. Yeah, it's I think it's true of anyone looking for your field and to make some kind of living off the arts, even if it's not your day job. Like, if you find your niche and you enjoy it, there's I think that's I consider this an absolute win.
Yeah.
Success.
Well, last thing, I guess, anything you want to plug, like where people could find you on social media and stuff.
So I do have a website that I have neglected for a while. I definitely need to update it. tylerstoneart.wordpress.com. At some point I'll finally bite the bullet and pay for an actual more professional website, but it's there. I'll try to maybe update it by the time this is out there. Otherwise, you can find me on Twitter and TikTok as Tyler Stone Art. Those are the two places I'm most active. I have an Instagram account also under that username, Tyler Stone Art, that I occasionally remember to put stuff on. And hey, I guess get it while it's hot. My first platform was DeviantArt. I'm also Tyler Stone Art there, but probably not for much longer because DeviantArt has like just fully made its bed with AI, and I think it's time to jump ship. But yeah, if it's some kind of a social media page, search Tyler Stone Art, and there's a good chance I will be there in some capacity. But Twitter and TikTok are definitely the best places to find me.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for listening, everybody, and thank you so much for joining me. Yeah,
thank you again for having me. This has been great. Let's do this again sometime.
Definitely.
Smoky Row Survivor meeting.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you like what you heard, make sure to leave a review on Apple Podcast. It helps out with the algorithm. And if you really like the show, make sure to check it out on Patreon. Link to the Patreon is in the show notes. You get 2 bonus episodes a month and deleted scenes from a lot of the free episodes. And you also get your name read out at the end of every episode. And hey, let's do that. This episode was brought to you by our lovely patrons, who include, I am once again Philip Cozy, Gavin Aronson, Joseph Gross, Kyle Gannis, Moss, regular sized horse, parentheses small, Robert Heilman, Stephen aka Spike Stonehand, the worst of all possible worlds, and of course, Chris Barker. Now here's some Dinosaur Jr.
Stop the